So before making the questionable decision to wander into alternate dimension of security land, I taught activists operational security for many years. Because all of us are so much more than just the value we produce under capitalism, I also have a bunch of non-computers hobbies. I am a longtime wilderness first responder, which has also enabled me to provide emergency medical support at protests. I love to cook and paint, and I love to go to sporting events where I get a great deal of joy out of yelling creative insults at referees. And when I have time, I pitch in with a mutual aid-based harm reduction collective, which is a really fancy way of saying I'm an anarchist and I care a lot about the community I live in. I'm also terrified of public speaking, but I believe in doing hard things, especially when I'm going to ask other people to do hard things. And I promised some friends that if this conference ran again, I would submit a talk. And I promised myself that I would never pass up an opportunity to tell people, I think you should unionize. It's an incredible honor to be standing up on this stage in front of you all. I know that at security conferences, people often talk about how to translate life skills into doing security well. Today I'm going to invert that standard a little bit and talk about how I think you can take what you already know, which is being good at security, and translate those skills into making a difference outside of the workplace. I'm sure most of us, if not everyone in this room, has had the experience of having so many problems to solve at work, we've become overwhelmed and couldn't figure out where to start. We know that being able to triage things and assign prioritization to them helps dig us out from underneath what would otherwise be unmanageable cognitive load. And usually that means starting with low-hanging fruit so that we can knock those problems out of the way, stop having to think about them, and free up capacity to address other things. If we're lucky, somebody notices that we're really struggling and comes to lend a hand, making everything that much more manageable for us. And because they've helped us to solve our problems, we eventually have the capacity and the desire to help them solve their problems too. I don't have much appetite for risk, but I'd bet money that nearly everyone in this room feels pretty good about it when they're able to help someone else. Community building works exactly the same way. When problems are too big for us to tackle head on, it's okay to take a step back and start with the smaller problems that we already have the power to solve. It's all right if you don't have an answer to ending world hunger. You can start by making sure your neighbors aren't hungry tonight. You're not expected to fix misogyny or transphobia or racism or ableism or any of the other forms of bigotry under the sun all by yourself, but you absolutely have the power to decide to learn how to make the targets of that bigotry feel safe in your presence. You can't solve other folks' problems for them, but sometimes helping with the bits that you are able frees them up to solve their problems themselves. It's a lot easier to figure out where tomorrow night's dinner is going to come from when you've eaten tonight, and it's a lot easier to navigate the minefield of social bias when you have persistent reminders that things aren't like that everywhere and don't have to be like that forever anywhere. Anyone who has worked in a SOC or an on-call role knows it's a lot easier to be proactive at problem solving when you're not being buried under an avalanche of poorly tuned alerts or being paged every time you close your eyes to sleep at night. I am not saying that being a SOC analyst is exactly the same thing as being transgender, because it obviously isn't. But I am willing to use a scenario I think many of you are able to relate to provide some context and help you build empathy for an experience most of you are unlikely to have, so that you can start to understand how big a deal it is when you become a safe space for other people. It's like giving them the opportunity to sleep through the night without fucking getting paged. When I look around the room, I see a room full of people who know the implications of what it means to work in the security space. The odds are nearly impossible. The resources are extremely limited. We face a high degree of pushback from our colleagues and from company leadership. The implications of our failures are massively impactful, and a best-case scenario usually looks like, and nothing happened. But you all decided to make a career out of it anyway. And I'm sure some of you will say, well, of course we all keep doing this. We have to pay the bills. There are easier ways to do that, and you are all smart people. So I have to assume that the reason that you're here, in this room at this conference, in this industry, is because you still think that things can be better, and you're willing to use your power to make them better. I think that's a huge deal. It means you've also already mastered the first few steps of making things better in the world around you. Believing that things can get better, recognizing that you have the power to help, and deciding not to let that power go to waste. As you can probably tell by my accent, things are really fucking stressful back home right now. And since our chief export is bad ideas, it's starting to look questionable elsewhere too. From the outside, I have to assume that it looks like the United States is descending into straight-up fascism. And as someone who lives there, I can confirm that is unfortunately a very accurate read. If I'm being a little bit real and a little vulnerable, I felt really overwhelmed lately, and I had a really hard time sitting down to write a hopeful talk. For one thing, Snare should fucking be here, but he isn't, because he can't take the risk of not being able to get back into the United States if he leaves. He's not the only person in that situation, and it's complete fucking bullshit. For another, I kept sitting down to write only to be interrupted by alerts that Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, was active in my neighborhood. Their name sounds innocuously bureaucratic, but for those of you who aren't aware, they're actually an ultra-violent law enforcement agency, and they have been terrorizing immigrant communities in the United States, abducting people from their homes and keeping them in appalling conditions. Some of their abductees are undocumented immigrants, some are legal US residents, sometimes they are even asylum seekers who are in the US legally and awaiting hearings. When ICE detains abductees, first they hold them in terrifying conditions, and then sometimes they even go on to send them back to the countries of origin that they fled for their own safety, or somewhere else entirely where the prisons brag about being places that no one ever leaves. In the days leading up to my flight to come here, a huge influx of ICE officers was dispatched to my community. There was a lot of fear and a lot of despair as ICE converged at a Coast Guard facility that they were using as a base of operations. Around the same time that ICE was being sent to my hometown, our government went into a shutdown, which they are still in, because they couldn't reach an agreement on budget. One political party was pushing to raise healthcare costs and wanted to use the threat of impending disruption of food assistance benefits to force the other party to agree to a healthcare cost increase that will put healthcare out of reach for millions of US residents. As a result, millions of people have lost access to their food assistance benefits as of November 1st. And there's no clear date for those benefits to be restored. It's really hard not to feel demoralized when there's no money to give people food or medical care, but seemingly unlimited budget to tear families apart. And I'm not sure that I would have been able to find anything useful to say here if not for the fact that even when shit is this fucked up and bullshit, there are people out there who are willing to do whatever they are able to try to make things right for each other. As ICE was increasing its numbers in the Bay Area, activists were ramping up organizing efforts. We had pre-existing communication networks, which we were already using to let each other know about ICE activity in various neighborhoods so that at-risk people could avoid being there, and so that people who are not at risk of deportation or incarceration could go and try to protect their neighbors. These networks were used to coordinate a response to what we feared was a sign of a massive increase in ICE abductions to come in our city and the surrounding areas. Lots of people showed up to try to stop them or at least slow them. Community members of conscience shut down the only road onto or off of the Coast Guard base where ICE was staging parking and abandoning vehicles, and even using their bodies to block the road in hopes of preventing them from carrying out their planned work. Meanwhile, as people lost food assistance benefits, restaurants, an industry with incredibly narrow profit margins, began offering cooked meals and other food to people whose assistance benefits have been shut off. Many of these restaurants are owned by the same immigrant communities whose families are being attacked by ICE. Many of the people who are offering this food may not be safe to show up to protest, so they're finding other ways to provide community support. Things obviously should not be like this, and people are saying so loudly with their words and their actions. What could feel like a completely hopeless scenario instead becomes a story about community resistance and resilience, where people are doing what they're able to solve each other's problems. Every time the US government does something terrible to its residents, people get creative and find ways to make sure their community's needs are being met to the best of their abilities. It's not perfect, and it's not enough, but it's making life-changing differences for people who are under attack, primarily because of their identities, and most importantly of all, it's helping ensure that those people don't feel alone while they're facing the impossible. It's hard not to feel uplifted when everywhere you look, strangers are helping other strangers because there is a need and they are able. It's hard not to feel hopeful when you're contributing to that community work and you can see firsthand the difference that showing up for others makes. That's why I'm not just here to make a speech. I'm here to make a call to action. Let's work together, do cool shit, be awesome to each other, and maybe save the world. I've been successful in security because of a bunch of lessons I learned through anarchist organizing, and I think that that probably means that you all can take your successes in security and translate them into effective ways to make things better for the people around you in your communities. Everyone in this room has a particular set of skills you have acquired over a very long career, skills that make you a nightmare for people who think they can get away with doing awful shit and hurting people. What's cool about this is they're not all the same skills. Whether you play offense or defense or some combination of both, there's a place for you in improving security at global scale, and there's a place for you in keeping your communities safe. Just like in the workplace, everyone's skill set plays a role, and just like in the workplace, bringing those skills together is how we build something bigger than the sum of its parts. Over the many years that I've been involved in organizing, I've done everything from frontline emergency medical support and pulling people out of tear gas to providing childcare so that other people could go do things. I've cooked meals for people without home from jail for people who were being released. I've shown up to court dates so that people didn't need to navigate the legal system alone. I've helped organize legal support for people. I've handed out hot coffees to cold people and spent time just hanging out with folks who are recovering from injuries. I say this not because I'm trying to brag about how altruistic or badass or cool I am, but because I really want to highlight how expansive activism can be. I'm talking about these things because I want people to understand that activism isn't all protests and police brutality, just like security isn't all red teaming and pen testing. I really want to drive home that at its core, some of the most effective activism is simply building community and learning how to show up to help people in the ways that they actually need and want to be helped. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I just want to make sure that you know whatever you're capable of and willing to do, there's probably a need for it in your community. There's room for everybody's skills in a successful security organization, and there's also room for everyone's skills in a community that looks out for each other. Also, as in security, it's not super productive to show up and declare that you have all the answers and that everyone should just do what you say. The most effective way to leverage whatever skills we bring to our community or our work is through asking questions to understand what the people around us are trying to accomplish, what they need, and then working with them to figure out how we can help meet those needs. Over the last decade in our industry, we've really started coming around to what I believe is one of the most impactful ideas, and in my opinion, fundamental realities of accomplishing security effectively. It also happens to be one of my personal favorite truths. You can't make people do things. Not only are your coworkers going to resent you for trying to force them into unnatural work patterns, but they will also find creative ways to circumvent whatever roadblocks you've constructed to prevent them from doing the thing that they wanted to do in the first place. Those circumventions almost always create new and exciting attack surface, and you're only going to find out about it when it causes a problem. I realize that internalizing this idea is something that we, as an industry, are still working to standardize on. But I think we were always going to wind up arriving at this realization because how many of us are hackers who stopped accepting "because I said so" as justification decades ago? It's not really a surprise that an argument that didn't work on us as children is not especially compelling to our colleagues who are adults. It won't convince them to do much of anything. So instead, we've started shifting from pen tests from phishing tests and phishing training that everyone immediately forgets the contents of but holds on to their resentment over, and towards phishing-resistant login mechanisms. We've started moving away from blaming individuals for mistakes, and instead, we started looking for ways to build systems that are resistant to human error. We've stopped demanding that software engineers memorize the OWASP top 10, started building tooling to help them avoid shipping common vulnerabilities, and began inviting them to have nuanced conversations with us about risk trade-offs and success criteria. We're starting to think of friction as something that we have a finite budget for inflicting on our colleagues, and are instead looking for ways to make the secure path the easiest path. We're finally moving away from the language of security is everyone's job and towards security is our job. We're here to help. In the security world, I think this is a genuinely important shift because it's making us much more effective, and also because it gets us to stop thinking of our coworkers as weak links that we need to solve for. Instead, we get to think of them as experts with skill sets we don't have who are working with us to achieve a larger goal. We're internalizing that winning is a team sport we can only succeed at through partnering with people who operate differently than we do. In community building and activism, this looks a lot like taking the time to understand people's goals and supporting the people working towards the same things as you, even when they approach working towards those things differently than you would. People in the world outside the workplace have different risk tolerances, and whether those tolerances are greater or smaller than our own, they significantly shape the way that others may work towards building a better world. Other people's ways of working towards change may look different than you wanted or expected, and that's completely okay. If someone is trying to affect change in a way that you dislike, that's totally fine. You don't have to join them. If you think something else might work better, give it a try. If it's successful, other people will join you. And if someone else is trying to make a change in a way that you don't really see yourself participating in, but they're successful, you can use that success to help you tune your own approach, even when you're not interested in adopting theirs. We all know that at work, sometimes the different approaches that people take do kind of wind up causing problems. And it's true in activism too. In both cases, instead of showing up and saying, "I told you so," we build a lot more trust by showing up and saying, "You seem to be in a bit of a pickle. How can I help?" In the security industry, we also constantly hear the phrase, "breach is inevitable." And I think that that line of thinking is more helpful at some times and when said by some people than it is others. Often it comes across as a declaration of our own sense of powerlessness. And sometimes people say it to try to convince us of the futility of our actions. And I'll talk about both of those things a little later. Sometimes I think breach is inevitable can actually be a mantra to help us get out of our own way. A reminder to not let perfect be the enemy of good. It can be a form of permission to experiment. If we're all but guaranteed to fail, what's the harm in piloting a new approach to an old problem? If we know our existing approaches inevitably lead to breach, why not try something else? Why not start to innovate? And if our existing social structures keep rewarding bigots at the expense of their targets, then maybe it's time to start looking for ways to innovate there too. Maybe you're sitting here thinking, okay, but we already have best practices, and that's true. We have practices that are the best things that we have tried so far. I'm not suggesting we toss existing best practices out recklessly and just YOLO whatever else, but I am saying if we're already looking at the impossible or unwinnable situation, the only person who ever found a way to save everybody in the Kobayashi Maru simulation did it by hacking it. Everyone in this room does hard things every day, and most of us are used to no-win situations and striving to choose the least worst option available, instead of ever getting an actually good outcome. But if there's anything that I've learned from being a non-binary anarchist hacker, it's that the obvious options often aren't the only options, and instead of being bummed out by having no good options available, maybe we can choose to be free enough to get creative and invent some. If we're doomed to failure and nothing we do matters, it can't hurt to try. When it comes to trying new things, I do think it's important to approach experiments scientifically, using existing best practices as a control, and trying modifications and other options alongside them. Think about the implications of what you're doing differently and have an idea for what new outcomes you think that your changes will deliver. Have a plan for knowing whether your experiment is successful, an understanding of what failure modes are likely, define ways to know whether you're encountering a failure mode, and make sure you have a backup plan for if you get into trouble. Also, very importantly, whether you're experimenting as a security practitioner or as an activist, talk to the community around you first. Make sure someone else hasn't already tried and failed at the thing you're about to attempt so that you can use that data to inform your efforts instead of simply recreating theirs. I see trying novel approaches to solving problems and also creating them to be a unique strength of folks in the security industry, and I want to see us applying those skills in our communities too. I also think we're great at talking about it when an experiment, either constructive or destructive, succeeds. But something I think we do well in activism that I wish we did a little bit more of in security is talking about our failures and the lessons learned. As an industry, we recognize the merit of sharing a root cause analysis and mitigation steps after we have a security incident. But I want to see us sharing our smaller failures too. I want conference talks about the experiments that never made it into production and what we would do differently today if we knew then what we know now. I want to see folks talking about their failures the same way that older activists talk to younger generations about the mistakes they made and what they learned from them. Talking openly about our failures benefits us as much as sharing our successes and gives everyone the gift of being able to make new and novel mistakes, the fun kind of mistakes. Learning from each other's trial and error gives us the gift of saved time by helping us avoid repeating the same failed experiments as our peers. And in both activism and security, we also gain opportunities to build trust and powerful bonds with people when we're willing to be vulnerable and open and talk about our failures. This can build the trust that's needed to make others feel able to come talk to us with their failures and ask for help fixing them. And eventually, others may even start coming to talk to us for opinions or advice before they cause problems so that we can build together instead of just helping with disaster recovery. If we hope to be successful in security, we also know that while a threat model is an important component of doing security well, it's not enough to simply know what we're trying to defend. We also have to understand what we're trying to build. We can't build effective controls without understanding what our colleagues need to accomplish and how they're likely to go about it. Without that understanding, our controls are just as likely to roadblock them as they are to keep our peers and our assets safe. We can't build elegant systems without understanding what they need to accomplish and what limitations need to be factored into our design. Working towards a more egalitarian society is really similar. In order to build a world where everyone's needs are met, we have to take the time to learn what those needs actually are, understand how they're unmet today, and envision what things around us might look different if we rebuilt society to meet those needs. In order to build better, we first have to take the time to suspend our disbelief and envision what best could look like in a perfect world. Knowing what we'd like to change and what we'd like to avoid is a great starting point, to be sure. But a pen test report that just says, all your shit is broken, lol, is almost as worthless as a pen test report that just says, looks good to me. And a road trip that's planned via dodging all the things you'd like to avoid is going to be unpleasant at best, if not completely unhinged. Your pen test report needs to have proposed remediations that actually fix the issues that you found. Your road trip needs an itinerary focused on the things you actually want to see, and if we're going to use our varied skills and resources to make the world a better place, we owe it to ourselves and each other to dream big and demand the most. Because we're so used to the way that things are today, it can take some effort to get there. What feels possible is often incredibly limited by existing circumstances. And I think it can be easy to forget that the realm of possibility is shaped by the improvements that we make in our surrounding circumstances just as much as by the ways in which things get worse. We wouldn't generally accept mitigating a critical vulnerability down to a high or a medium as a long-term solution. And even if we might be willing to settle for mitigating down to a low and accepting the risk, we usually start by asking for full remediation, right? In our work, we're often trying to thread a needle where we're not letting perfect be the enemy of good, but we also don't want to settle for good-ish when better is on the table. A world where we all treat each other well and everyone has what they need to thrive is something we all deserve. And I genuinely believe that we owe it to ourselves and each other to keep demanding that conditions improve, especially when we see an opportunity to advocate for someone who may not be in the room today, but who might be if we made it a little easier and safer for them to join us. We're not going to build utopia overnight, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have an idea of what utopia looks like, and it doesn't mean that we should settle for anything less in the long term. In Judaism, we have an idea, tikkun olam, which is what we call the work of healing the world. To some of us, including me, tikkun olam is functionally the meaning of life. It's the idea that we exist to make things better and that every morning we wake up is an opportunity to continue that work. I first learned about tikkun olam in my childhood while spending time with a distant cousin who had retired from being a doctor and bought a small vineyard. We were planting young fruit trees that were unlikely to produce any meaningful amount of fruit in his lifetime. When I asked him why he was putting in all this work to plant trees, knowing that he was probably never going to enjoy their shade, he used it as an opportunity to teach me about the work of healing the world. If you think about it through a self-centered lens, such an act is kind of sad, maybe even a waste of time. But if you look at it through a lens of generosity, it becomes joyous and almost defiant. It's a gift to future generations. It's a way to remain on Earth well past your allotted years. It's a legacy, and a reminder that the things that we do for ourselves are minuscule in comparison to the impact of the things we do for others, which is why I'm standing here, decades later, telling you a story about someone who passed away years ago and how they changed my life. Through telling his story to new people, he's still here, continuing his work of healing the world, and maybe changing some of your lives too. At face value, the work of healing the world might seem like a pretty daunting task, but we've also got an accompanying saying, courtesy of Rabbi Tarfon, a man who lived so fucking long ago, he actually predated the legalization of Christianity in Rome. His ancient words roughly translate to, "We are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are we free to abandon it." In other words, we don't actually have to succeed at fixing the world, but we do have to keep trying to do it. In security and in activism, we're functionally working towards ideals that may not even be possible. And in both cases, there are people who stand to benefit from convincing us that neither a better world nor better security is possible. Some days, the best motivation for continuing to push forward might simply be thinking about who those people are and what they want and saying, fuck them. I bring this up because I think it's easy to keep going on the days where we have hope, but I think it's really important to keep going on the days where hope and success feel out of reach. It's okay and normal to feel demoralized or overwhelmed by work or the world. And it's important to remember that even on our worst days, we're still not powerless. On those days, I find the Tikkun Olam framing really helpful because it's less tied to achieving a specific outcome and much more tied to how we choose to live our lives day after day and how we show up in our community, whether that's in the workplace or in the world outside the office. We don't have to solve the whole problem. We just need to keep solving the pieces of it that we're able to today. Short of brain meds, I think that taking a step back and asking, what can I do to make this problem smaller, and then doing it, is one of the most useful tools any of us has in fighting off low morale or digging ourselves out of overwhelm. My community showing up to protect vulnerable people within it was a clear reminder of exactly what I came here to talk to all of you about. The power every single one of us has to make things better for the people around us, and in doing so, to contribute to making the world a better place. Maybe we can't fully remediate a vulnerability, but we can make it harder to exploit and reduce its potential blast radius. Maybe we aren't able to meet a compliance requirement as written, but we're able to uphold the spirit of it through compensating controls. Maybe we can't get every SaaS tool behind SSO, but we can prioritize making sure that our most critical systems are, and that we've enabled phishing-resistant login mechanisms so that our colleagues don't have to live their lives in abject fear of opening an email. Everyone in this room is a professional at making progress when looking around, seeing what's changed, and deciding what to tackle next based on what's within our reach and in need of improvement. Once you start looking for those in-reach problems in the world around you, I'm willing to bet that you'll notice loads of opportunities to make life easier and better for everyone else. And most of them are faster and require a lot less physical labor than planting trees. Often, it's as simple as speaking up when someone makes a sexist joke or a racist comment. It also may feel uncomfortable because sometimes speaking up on behalf of others goes against cultural norms. But if existing cultural norms favor bigoted speech over the well-being of the people around you, are those norms worth preserving? Or is it time to establish new cultural norms more aligned with the world you actually want to live in? Remaining neutral upholds the status quo, but our status quo may not actually be serving us well, especially if we have any desire to spend more and more time in rooms full of people who don't all look and sound exactly the same as us. Improving conditions around us also often requires personal growth, and personal growth often feels really, really uncomfortable, especially when we're first learning to expand our worldview and think about problems that don't directly affect us. I know nobody in this room is sitting here thinking to themselves, gee, it's a good thing there aren't more women here. But how many of you have gone farther and asked, why aren't there more women here? How many of you have educated yourselves on what sexism actually looks like in the workplace so that you can be an effective advocate for the colleagues who experience it? How many of you are willing to confront misogyny head-on when you see it coming? And if you're not willing, why? Is your own comfort really worth letting systemic bias hurt your women colleagues and friends when changing an environment really can be as simple as overcoming that discomfort and speaking up to say, hey, that's not cool? There are people in this world who will use their power and their platforms to make you feel small, to make you think that you are powerless to make a difference, to try to convince you that you will never be as good or important as they are. They're the same kind of people who will tell you that if you ever hope to have any power, you can only get it by taking it from people who have even less than you do. They're full of shit, and they know it. There's only one reason to try to convince you that a better world isn't possible. They say these things not because they believe them, but because they need you to believe them so you won't threaten their strangling grip on us all. They say these things because in their hearts, they are afraid of us. They know the truth. Every single person in this room has unimaginable power if they can simply figure out how to work with the people sitting next to them. Community building is activism because when we work together, we are capable of things that are bigger and more beautiful than anything we could ever build alone. We've seen it in our work when we enable the people around us to do their best, and it's true out in the world too. One of my favorite authors, Ursula Le Guin, once said, "Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings." And I know she was right. If you take nothing else from my words today, please do start looking for people who are already working to make things better and figure out how you can pitch in. If you're successful, keep going. If you're unsuccessful, try something else. Plant trees, feed people who don't have enough to eat, stick up for strangers, tell your friends when they are being jerks, listen to your friends when they tell you you're being a jerk. Get comfortable growing through discomfort. Never stop looking for ways to help others. Never stop looking for ways to build bonds with people who are struggling differently from you. Look for ways to lighten the loads of everyone around you and let them lighten yours too. You are not obligated to complete this work, and neither are you free to abandon it. In a worst-case scenario, the billionaires and fascists were right all along, and all you're left with is a sense of satisfaction that you did everything in your power to try to improve things, but you've lost nothing in the process. I know it's the billionaires and fascists who are wrong, and the good rabbi, and my cousin, and Ursula Le Guin who were right. We have everything to gain. Believing that something is better, or believing something better is possible, is an incredible first step, and it takes a lot of courage. Envisioning what better looks like takes courage too. I genuinely believe that all of you are brave enough to not just imagine a better world, but to also keep growing and changing so that we can build that world together. Thank you.